There seemed to be a smaller than usual group today. Why don't we begin with what seems to be a key chapter, I think, in the Gospel according to John. So, and I'm having trouble with Wi-Fi here. Looks like I need to reset, but I'll do that afterwards. So if I go out, then as I did yesterday, it'll take me a minute or two and I'll just switch to the phone, to the AT&T line. Okay. Do we have any comments or questions based on last week's discussion?
It's just getting easier and easier to understand, don't you think? It's such a simple text.
Yes, very one-dimensional. Yeah, totally. Okay. All right then. Shall we begin? Then Wayne, would you like to read the first paragraph for us?
Sure.
We're in John chapter 11.
Now if my voice works. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was.
Okay. Does anybody want to begin with? I mean, I of course have many questions, but
He sounds
Great.
rather uncaring right there.
yeah, it sounds insensitive. And that's a theme that there's going to be a line like that in each of the following paragraphs as well that have to do with, let us know this is a focal point of the narrative. This stress between what we expect of Jesus as a healer and what's happening in this story. Why this is a kind of a tipping point, I think, in the narrative of John.
One of you great theologians can tell me why he's so obtuse all the time also with with saying things like this illness does not lead to death, and so that God may be glorified through it. I mean, that's the way he talks. So that's fine, I guess, but it always drives me a little crazy.
Yeah, it's a little cryptic. It's like speaking in parables, right? It's curious, it's mystical, it's obtuse, I think was your word. Yeah, and so what is the phrase, this illness does not lead to death, but rather it is for God's glory. And as we'll see, Wayne, we're nearing the end of what's called the Book of Signs, as many scholars talk about, or as many scholars divide this gospel into. And the Book of Signs, this being the last of those signs, which are, as we've said, like parables. They're miracles, yes, but they're not meant to lead to. They're not meant to prove God. or Jesus as much as to give insight into what is on the surface and what can be seen by sight. It's an insight. And then the other thing I would say is that the second part that we're now entering into, as Rabbi David just said, this is a bridge. We move into the book of glory. So this idea of glory, doxa in the Greek, is very interesting, and I think we'll have to drill down into what that means, much like we've had to do with eternal life and some of these other, classic Johannine words or phrases. So I don't know if I don't have an answer for you other than this idea of glory is something that's going to be begged to be discussed as we go. And then also, let's see, what was the other part? So that the Son of God may be glorified through it. And then accordingly, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. And then, meaning this is not going to lead to death. There's something else going on here. But Wayne, one last thing I wanted to add is keep in mind, this is like the fifth edit of this document in 90-ish Common Era. And therefore the temple has been gone for 20 plus years. And the political and religious games and challenges and dynamics are just bubbling up. You can almost feel it bubbling up in this particular text. And keep in mind that the gospel writers, or the community out of the I would say the city of Ephesus, in this fifth edition, they know what's going to happen, right? They have the historical understanding. Now I think the Gospel of John, more than the synoptic gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is, like I said at the beginning, giving us insight. And what is that insight seeing is probably our question, or my question.
Yeah, but it is Jesus being, is this a new aspect? And first thing hits me is it's not going to kill him, and obviously it does. But is he being prescient in this passage, or is God giving him some foreknowledge that he knows all this, or does he have great medical knowledge?
Well, again, great questions. My feeling is that it's most readers, especially most Christian readers that I've talked to, who take it at face value. It makes, what comes across to them is that Jesus is prescient. He sees that, therefore he is who he says he is. That makes him Son of God, because he knows what's going to happen before it happens. And many readers will just take that at face value and then ask that question. What I'm suggesting is that there's a narrative here. There's a story that we have to take this story on its own terms as a story. And yes, that is a question to ask, but I'm thinking the gospel writers aren't making that point per se. They already know. This is hindsight. They're now reflecting on what did happen and mining those historical stories for depth and for insight. And so I don't know. I mean, a lot of John's gospel comes off that everything's predetermined. The God in this gospel comes off as, for a lot of folks, is everything's predestined. And God, and as we'll soon see, Jesus says, I know what I'm going to do, but I'm doing it for their sake. And your consternation is valid, and it forces us to maybe ask these questions again and again, and maybe in some different ways. That's what I've got now. Anybody else?
Yeah, Steve, I pulled out a book introducing the New Testament by Raymond Brown, and he has a little clip about chapter 11 in his analysis of John's Gospel. I could share that if you would like. It's not long.
Please.
I hope you can hear me. Jesus gives life to Lazarus, even as he gave life to the blind man, and thus performs the greatest of his signs. Yet, paradoxically, the gift of light leads to the decision of the Sanhedrin that Jesus must die, a decision that will bring about his glorious return to the Father. In the account of the man born blind, a dialogue explaining the sign value followed the healing. But in the raising of Lazarus, the dialogue that explains this sign precedes to have conversation after Lazarus emerges from the tomb would be an anticlimax. In the dialogue, Martha already believes that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, comparable to Peter's confession in Matthew, and that her brother will rise on the last day. But Jesus leads her to an even deeper faith. And this is what you're saying. You're saying there's a story behind the words here. Let's see. Because Lazarus will eventually die again. That is why he emerges from the tomb, still bound with the burial cloths. Jesus comes to give an eternal life impervious to death, as he will symbolize by emerging from the tomb, leaving his burial clothes behind. So I just think that kind of doesn't explain the whole story to us as readers, but the Midrash gives us deeper insight into the background of what's happening here.
Thanks for adding that, Don, but I do want to just remind you, there are folks here that have never read this story. So they don't actually know what's going on here.
Yeah,
right? So we have to.
I didn't know that, and I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I just want, it'd be good to go back to what you told us now when we finish the story to see how that adds up with our understanding. In this first paragraph, there's a few things. I have a few questions about the story as it is, Steve. I'd like to go back to that.
Good.
How is the story told? To listen to the telling of the story from the storyteller. What is the intention here? And a few things that come up is, what exactly is the relationship between Mary and Martha compared to the people listening to this? They know the other gospels as well. They know it. I'm a little confused with who's related to whom here. It just might be me. So that Mary and Martha, a little bit of elucidation of that would help me out. Any thoughts on the anointing? I understand in the story why the anointing of the perfume comes up here because of the end of the story. But what if there's any greater meaning to that to the folks that would have heard this? And and then a comment to Wayne's hearing this and being a little disturbed, to point out that the storyteller is telling us is infusing the character of Jesus here with a characteristic that is common in many people as a human characteristic. That is to somehow make sense out of tragedy. The illness is a tragedy without him knowing details, but already the interpretation is, well, what you hear people say, there's a reason for everything. I happen to disagree with that philosophy and that theology, but that everything has a reason. Everything, you must find something positive, motivation for anything that's happening. And I think that, to me, that's what I'm hearing here. Jesus is you've got bad news. It's probably for good. It might be for good, or it is for good. But back to the relationship between Mary and Martha, and what are the, when the people listening to this hear this, what are they thinking, Steve? What are they
Well,
understanding?
yeah, like in the three earlier gospels written, or at least in circulation before the Gospel of John, there are the stories of Mary and Martha, who are dear, close friends. What is Bethany? Just a couple of miles. I mean, it's not far from Jerusalem, is it?
Yeah, very close.
And,
Yeah,
and
east
so
to
that
east.
was
Yeah,
kind of his home
yeah.
base. That was his safe place. And I think we've all, or at least Christians who grew up hearing this gospel, know the story of Mary and Martha in the kitchen, and Mary listens to Jesus's teaching. Mary's in there being passive aggressive, doing all the work, and complains about her sister not pitching in. That's kind of a famous story. But Lazarus is the first time we hear of him, as he's a brother of the two. And for some reason, the interpreter of this gospel, or the interpretation of this gospel, uses Lazarus for an important point, which we're about to see. What that is, and as you said, also, we're going to hear about, the perfume incident comes up at the end of this story and involves, or at the beginning of 12, I forget, but it involves Judas. And then his character rises to the surface in a more vivid way, as he complains about wasting all that money to waste it on Jesus's feet. So I don't know. The plot does thicken. These are characters who come in, and yeah, I just, this idea of glory, I should say, maybe this will help. The word, and I'd love to get your take on how glory is used in the Hebrew telling. But as I understand it, glory is revealing something about who God is back to God. It has the root in reputation. It's glory gives one a good reputation. Shame gives one a bad reputation. So there's something about glorifying God, giving God a good reputation, and how that is going to be revealed through Jesus. Jesus's own life and death is going to reveal that. What that is still hidden at this point in the storyline. I don't know, David, if I don't feel like I answered your question, but
Well, of course, we're still in the first scene of the car. As far as the language is concerned, the question about language, the real way to do it would be to see the word that's used here in the Greek, and then to go back in the Septuagint to see what kind of Hebrew words, biblical Hebrew words, it translates. But the term that's used in rabbinic literature that reflects this, the glorification or the shaming of, is kiddush, Shem
right.
Shemaim, or kiddush Hashem, which literally would be the sanctification of God's name. And the opposite of that would be Chilul Hashem, Chilul Kvod Adonai, Chilul being it's not exactly secularization, but the vulgarization, not as vulgar as in naughty words, vulgar, but vulgar as in the vulgate, the common, making the holiness common. It's not impurity, but it's kind of sanctity and common, profane. And that's an interesting thing, because you always want to ask, well, we think of God as being holy. God is the one who bestows holiness on the world, on humanity, but it's that reciprocal relationship between God and humanity, which the whole Hebrew Bible project is about, right? It's about how do human beings communicate with God, and how does God's presence manifest itself on a day-to-day basis on earth through people doing that
Love that
will.
last sentence. How does it manifest in the day to day? That's I think a beautiful way to put it.
Uh,
Yes,
doesn't
Don.
doesn't glory reveal something special about God? For instance, when you see something glorious, it makes us aware that the source of that glory is special. So wouldn't that specialness be attributed to a people who had God in their history and had saw many of God's works, that giving glory is just another element of the specialness of God's relationship with God's people?
Yeah, that's Leviticus is Kedoshim to you, therefore be holy. If Lekadesh something means to set it aside. That's its basic meaning. You set it aside, but then it became setting aside the divine. And so in the same way that God has set aside the people of Israel in that ongoing narrative from Genesis onwards, set aside, then the people of Israel set aside God from the other ideas of what godliness might be. And so that reciprocity. But yeah, setting aside is a good way to looking at that. It's giving glory.
Setting aside as in hallowing the name, or as in ineffable.
Part of it, not only though, part of it. It's
Yeah.
sometimes it's literally setting aside because you had options. Baal and Ashtoreth and other characters out there. There were religious or spiritual practices. But why don't we go ahead and see where the
Yeah.
story takes us, okay?
Okay.
Richard, you want to go ahead with 7?
Then after he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again," the disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring to merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him."
Now, Wayne, that should have clarified pretty much everything, right?
To my mind, this paragraph is
He
kind of
doubles down.
Jesus is saying to people, keep up, people, keep up. You're behind. You're not following me. You know how, it's this movement of mind and communication, which seems to be, the gap seems to be opening between Jesus and the people, his followers, his closest people. Of course, there's a human aspect of this as well. His people care about him. Jesus, why are you going to go back to Judea now? That's trouble for you. Now, we just kind of left off with Jesus in Jerusalem. That's just a sign, though, that this story, that detail of the story means the story had another place in the chain of narrative, someplace in some other version, I'm guessing, right? Because this sounds like they're coming down from the Galilee again. Because whether you're in Jerusalem or Beit Anya, Bethany, you're in Judea. That's the same area. So once again, people keep up. This repetition of the thing about not being there, this mischance of saving of Jesus as healer. Jesus's main title at this point seems to be the healer, of all those signs. And then Jesus wasn't there to heal. And then when he's there again, he says, the people say, for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. Again, that in every paragraph, that issue of not being there is going to come up, so that you may believe. And then finally, Thomas, I love the name Thomas because he was a twin. Hebrew for twins is te'omim. So te'om or tom. So Thomas is really based on that Hebrew, which I actually didn't realize that. I didn't know that until I saw this verse here. I have a special interest in twins. Our fourth and fifth daughters are twins, not only twins, they're identical twins. not only were they born identical twins in the same placenta, but to this very day, I confuse between them.
Are they harassed constantly by social scientists who want them to be in studies?
No, but I used to tell people that if it was up to me, I would have raised one with metal rock music in darkness, the other one with light and Cat Stevens, and see what would happen. But Sasha wouldn't allow me to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but in a cryptic way, or obtuse way, he's also teaching, right? This is a setup for a word to be manifest that they need. And so I think right now, while he talks about the light and the darkness, and he talks about the work that we're doing, and then this sleep versus death, and then of course Thomas doesn't get it. He just assumes, well, let's just go die with him. It's a setup, and I think we just have to wait until the punchline to then start reflecting on what that teaching might be. Yeah, Claire.
I think the next paragraph kind of explains it a little bit more.
Did you read ahead?
Pardon me?
You read ahead?
A little bit, but only because I kind of knew what was going to happen from a previous information that I have. But at least I was told. I think to me, the most important thing is the resurrection. Jesus doesn't say you're not going to die in this world, because we're all going to die. But it's the resurrection that he's emphasizing. That's what I get out of it. I don't know about everybody else, but that is the most important thing.
So why don't we wait for the resurrection, then we'll see what we get out of it.
You want me to read the next paragraph?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world."
We're still not at the resurrection yet. We're getting there, but he's already died again. You've got in the middle in the 4th line, "Lord, if you had been here." This constant. There's a reason everybody's jumping at the bit to get to the end of it, right? We kind of we want it to happen, and that's the power of the narrative as well, as to build that suspense, that tension.
Was resurrection part of the Jewish faith at that time?
So what we usually say, Wayne, is that the predominant view is that the idea of resurrection of the dead per se, as in the end of days, comes up only in the 2nd century BCE in the book of Daniel. That's the first time we hear of it. Some people like to think that perhaps it's in Ezekiel as well, with the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. My teacher, Professor Moshe Greenberg, used to say, no, that's misunderstanding it as a parable. But resurrection of an individual comes up in at least or 2 stories. I brought one of them in the second in 2 Kings 17 with Elijah. There's a similar kind of a story with Elisha as well. Maybe we'll take a break we'll look at that afterwards perhaps and see how that fits in or doesn't fit in. But as far as the resurrection of somebody who's dead is usually dead, that's the end of it. There's a case of somebody who's almost dead and stays almost dead for days or weeks. I don't remember. That's Abigail's husband. I'm forgetting his name right now. No, with an N. The David, who David argued with and before he was king. But yeah, and yes, Don.
Yes, I wanted to suggest that Martha and Mary both might have been aware of the teaching of Jesus before this, because they are affirming something that they heard or knew in the past. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was Thomas is the same one who is the doubting Thomas that appeared when Jesus appeared in the middle of the room, in the upper room, showing Thomas the wounds in his hands. That was the same Thomas that we're speaking of here too.
Oh, okay. What is it said? The first thing that you said though, what was what tells you that, what is the teaching that about Jesus they knew?
Martha says, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. So I'm just thinking that she had prior knowledge of that doctrine in order to say it at this point in the story.
Right. And she had prior knowledge of Jesus as being a healer. She knows that
Yes.
Jesus is
Yeah.
a healer, and yet she's still disappointed.
Yes. Yeah.
Had to bring
I
it.
think the other thing is the two sisters
Mm.
often gave hospitality to the disciples and the apostles while they traveled. Hospitality at their home.
Thank you.
Don, I would also suggest that a predominant take is that the popular Pharisaism of the day believed in the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead at the end of all time. And that's how I see her referring to, yeah, Rabbi, we know about all that theology. Yeah, of course, everybody's going to be raised at the end. But I'm talking about my brother right now. And Rita, Claire, you are also going to say something.
Yes, I think the relationship between the two sisters is really interesting. I don't know if that is of any importance, but it just struck me. The fact that there's always one who is doing more than the other. The other one is being a little bit more lax, and the author is making it a point of emphasizing this. So I just kind of curious, I know this happens a lot among sisters in real life, but I thought that was kind of interesting, because it says here that she didn't go, she stayed home. And there's always some fault with that Mary has with Martha.
You're right. Yeah, that is interesting.
Wayne, back to your question and combining it with what was just said, what Steve said about the Pharisees. The resurrection of the dead, while we understand today, historically began in the 2nd century. The Pharisees, they were always arguing with the Sadducees about this. This is one of the bones of contention. One of the major issues that comes up when Josephus and others talk about the differences between these two parts of society. And the Sadducees very much did not believe in it. So it's not a prevalent Jewish belief. The Pharisees in the Talmud have a few pages devoted to it in the Talmud, few pages devoted to trying to prove that it actually comes from different verses in the Torah itself. Not terribly successful, which was why they dedicated so much space to it. But so why don't we go on and see what happens then?
Well, David, I'd like to also while we're on this paragraph, point out what we've tried to say many times in this particular gospel. You'll see in verse 19, and many of the Jews had come to Mary and Martha to console them. And then, and just before that, up in 7, when Jesus says, let's go back to Judea, they said, Rabbi, don't you know the Jews were just about to stone you? So again, there's different groupings or parts of society that constitute the Jews of that period. And we just have to have a sharp eye not to overgeneralize any one group.
Right. Okay. So, Megan, you want to take us further? 28?
28. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. Right. But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind men have kept this man from dying?"
So to once again point out the had you been here element that we've had since the first paragraph here as well, he wouldn't have died. And so I think the two things that come up for me here are this idea of greatly disturbed, which is connected to the first verse in 38 as well. And then the reaction to those Jews that we're talking afterwards. The background of this, of course, is that people would come to comfort the mourners in their own home, to be with them, to sit with them, to wait on them, to serve them, so they could just be in their mourning, to be present. And when they get up, of course, that's natural for them to follow because they want to continue to accompany her in her mourning. Of course, the way that the narrator structures this is that gives them a chance to come and then see what it would have been a very private conversation becomes a very public conversation. At this moment when Jesus is disturbed, that's a word that's translated differently in different versions. It doesn't mean, it apparently does not mean disturbed as in is angry, upset, that kind of disturbed, I'm bothered by that, but has to like disturbing water, some the opposite of calm. And this is, to me, this is fascinating also to this very, as we get closer and closer, as we know, to the godliness, Jesus giving expression to the divine aspect of who he is in this world, he's still showing very human characteristics of trembling, something the word I'm guessing was probably in their mind was something like lehitrages or lehitragesh, the reflexive of being uncalm or in feeling, but it's a reflexive kind of a verb, and that's what the Greek is also in reflexive tense there, I think, as well. And then finally at the end, so it's like you've got people that some people said, well, they look how what a beautiful kind of a situation this is. And then some people saw how then if he's such a big healer, why didn't he come to heal? Again, that issue as well.
What have you done for me lately?
What's that?
What have you done for me lately?
Yeah. So whatever Jesus is doing in many eyes is not going to be the right answer. Yeah.
I do think it's curious and he was greatly disturbed in spirit. because that word could have been the word for compassion. It comes that deep, you're from the gut. But this Greek word is most often translated like a horse snorting, just a horse that's just ready to move and agitated. And so it just makes me wonder why the translator chose or why the reader might choose. Well, in this case, it just means positive. And then he weeps. If he already knew he was going to raise, why does he weep? And I think those are just interesting questions.
I think he's confronted with the that's the humanness of Jesus right there. That's that he's, because Jesus still, to my mind, I'm oversimplifying, to my mind, Jesus on the cusp of humanhood to otherness, to divinehood. I'm making up these words, I realize, but
they call that the hypostatic union, the full nature of human and the nature of divinity being joined in Jesus. And I would bet some money that human tendency is picked up from John's gospel here to create a doctrine like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Sue Spicer, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but from a standpoint of
Yeah, Don, we seem to have a problem with your connection. You're frozen and I don't think we heard really what you said.
okay, is this better?
Yeah, give it a try. Go ahead. Oops,
Oops, he's going.
hoppa. It's like a magic trick.
There you are.
There he is.
He's resurrected.
What was it you wanted to say, Don?
I wanted to say that the combination of humanity and divinity in one person leads Christians to have a feeling that God has empathy with the troubles that they face.
And I would say that the flip side of that is that if an individual understands that there's the humanness and the godliness in that could possibly energize that human being to be more godlike in compassion.
Yeah.
So Susie, are you up for reading today?
I am, but the noise in here won't let me.
Oh, okay.
That's why the earphone.
Okay, we'll catch you on the flip side. Okay. So Rita Claire, do you want to do Forest 38?
Sure. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to him, "Unbind him and let him go."
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and read the next paragraph as well?
Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? This man is performing many signs." And If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, is it, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. You do not understand that it is better for you to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed." He did not say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he had prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but to gather into one the dispersed children of God. So from that day on, they planned to put him to death.
Okay, so the irony in the raising of the dead to life, as Steve mentioned, brings about the death sentence. The being bound up with strips of cloth and then being able to unbind him, maybe symbolizing the freeing of the spirit as well. The perfume at the beginning of the story, possibly foreshadowing the stench of the decomposing body at the end.
And the anointing for burial.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to me, the whole point was the fact that not that he could keep someone from dying, but that wasn't the point. The point was that in order to believe in him, you had to believe that he, even after you died, he could resurrect you. So that, to me, that's the whole point of John.
Yeah.
What do you make of the 4 days?
That's nice, Rita Claire. I mean, I think that's gets at the right. You're aiming this in the right way, I think, by saying that. What is the insight? You know, what is the teaching? Don, I'm sorry. Don, you were just saying
yeah,
something?
I was asking, what do people make of the 4 days? Why did he wait sitting around?
I think for decomposition to set in, just from the story's sake, it makes it even a greater task. 4 days is really dead. 1 day, okay, maybe you're dead. It's a coma, whatever. 4 days.
You're gone.
There's something about the third day of everything. You know, I've heard it say that if you're sick and if you're going to get better, it doesn't happen till after the third day. Has anyone ever heard that?
There's a model, a form model in biblical literature, Hebrew biblical literature, both in poetry and in prose. And there's things that happen 3 times, and the 4th time is a difference.
Yeah.
3 is part of a cycle, you know, and the 4th is when the change comes. Yeah. There are 3 groups of the plagues, 3, 3, 3, and it's on the 4th. It's only one that the change is made. Now I'm blanking all the stories, but my friend and teacher Yair Zakovich, that was his PhD dissertation, was on the model of 3 and then 4. There's also a model of 6 and 7 in the book of Proverbs, which we're coming up to, not next week or the week after, but yeah. So, you know,
kind of, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it just recalled, I had a serious car accident many years ago. And I remember I had a really tough night. And the night nurse said to me that tomorrow was going to be the 3rd day. And when I woke up in the morning, I was going to feel better. And miraculously, I did. That has always stayed with me. I thought that was really interesting.
Nurse is prophet. So high priest is prophet, of course, is a ridiculous idea from a Jewish literary point of view. The gift of prophecy was never part of the priesthood. This paragraph also gives us a rather depressing or negative view of the priesthood. It wasn't hereditary, it was appointed, which means there was money behind it, and that we do know that about the first century. That was a lot of corruption around the appointments of the high priest, and not because they're qualified or not because they're from the right family. Not that that means they're qualified in our view, but in biblical times, being from the right family had a lot to do with it. And then that high priest, Caiaphas, becomes a prophet without knowing it. Yeah, prophet, and I don't know it. Yeah.
Richard?
Yes.
It strikes me, and no one's brought this up, but the Romans are very important here. I mean, Caiaphas is saying that everyone will believe in Jesus, and that will induce the Romans to wipe us out. I mean, wouldn't God have control over the Romans? I mean, I don't understand that why Caiaphas would behave the way he did, because of the Romans.
If he was a political appointment or an appointment because he had money to buy it, then do you understand it? He's not a terribly spiritual character.
I mean, why would the Romans care?
Oh,
Well, I mean,
because of
why would
revolution.
they care whether the Jews believed in Jesus or not?
Because he'll claim the kingship. He'll claim to be the king of Jews. Now, perhaps that's the influence of the other gospels. That's not said here, but I think that's in the background. I think everybody knows that that was part of it. David is Jesus in the line of David.
But Caiaphas is not afraid of Jesus. He's only afraid of the Romans.
He's
yeah.
afraid of what? Yeah.
Yeah, because they're trying to keep the zealots at bay on one hand, and the Sadducees are trying hard to maintain their hold on the temple stability, and I just think it's fraught. It's a powder keg, and also, while the Jews were given a special dispensation from the Romans to worship as they pleased, once Jesus comes into the picture, not only, and remember that was the charge, that he set himself up to be a king equal to Caesar or against Caesar, but on the other hand, bringing in outsiders, non-Jews, would tamper with that that special protection that they had given to the Jews alone. Now, if the Jews start to include outsiders, the Gentiles, then that dilutes the sanction that they had, it seems. So yeah, it's a political, expedient to just, and there's also a lot of messiahs rising up. There's a lot of autocrats who are trying to presume to take power. So it's just a powder keg at this point, or had been, up to and including and past the destruction of the temple itself. Richard, how are we raising money for the cause? How we doing? And is the jazz event happened? Sorry to butt in, but we're about to lose our time. Do we still have time to give to that?
Oh, yes. So it's time to give.
Okay. I need to get some money from the folks that I've included, and I just wanted to
Right.
make sure I don't forget that.
Yeah,
So
Jews to be included in the event is on the 4th of December. To be included in the ad book, I think we have until the 20th. Yeah.
okay. Well,
Um,
I'll get on it as soon as I
thank
can. The last thing though, if we have just one more minute, is I do think there's something to say about Jesus is being disturbed in a horse snorting sort of way, like the death. The reptilian brain makes us do whatever we can to avoid death and to enhance pleasure. And I think death is like the one last thing that keeps us from freely being able to worship God and to be free, because then we're never quite given free choice. We're always avoiding pain and enhancing pleasure. And so there's something about the fear of death that I think the Johannine community is trying to address, as the last sign. It's like a foretaste of the resurrection, yes, but dealing with death seems to be what the point of this teaching is for me. And I know we don't have much time to explore that, and I know I've got to go myself. I'm on the road, as y'all can see, driving back to Austin.
Well, thanks for being here, everyone. And we'll see you next week.
And, okay, bye-bye.
Oh, wait, next week is Thanksgiving? No, not next week. Week after. Okay. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.